In this section, we're going to cover where and how to find ideas. But first, we must define our idea as narrowly as possible. Here's a mistake I see all the time. Someone gets excited about AI and says, I'm going to build AI for law, or I'm going to build AI for healthcare, or I'm going to build AI for education. And I get it, these are big markets. The ambition is right, but the approach almost never works because AI for law isn't a product, it's a category. It's too broad to build anything specific enough that someone would actually use. Another one is, I'm going to build AI to summarize notes. For who is the question? Let me give you a much better version of the idea. AI for doctors to take medical notes during their sessions with patients. See the difference? That's concrete and that's narrow. When you build with that level of specificity, you can create something that fits perfectly into someone's actual workflow. Paul Graham, the founder of Y Combinator, says this: you want to focus on building for a very small and narrow set of users before you think about expanding. And that is the way that you are able to build something so good for that specific users that nobody else even comes close. So what's an example of concrete? An example of a concrete idea is defining the problem, is defining the outcome, and is defining the specific end user. For example, it could be for doctors, or it could be for doctors in the UK, or it could be for doctors in the UK that work for the NHS, or it could be for doctors in the UK that work for the NHS in Greenwich. That's a much better definition in terms of defining and narrowing your problem. Now, with that lens, the next step is to think about where can we generate idea from. There are a couple of approaches. The first approach is being customer-driven. This is what I call customer-driven sourcing of ideas. And this is the gold standard. It is often the lowest risk way to find ideas. Here's what it means. You find ideas by talking directly to potential customers, similar to the restaurant example that we went through. You look for people who actually have a budget and people who are actually looking for solutions and people who would pay to solve their problem. The reason it is low risk is simple. You are not guessing. Businesses tell you exactly what they need. They tell you, hey, I have this problem. It's costing me money and I would pay X to fix it. That's validation before you've even written a single line of code. It's also good to get general feedback around the user or customer by focusing on a subset of folks which I call subject matter experts. This was something that we use very well at AI Fund. These are people who deeply understand the domain. They can give you incredible insight into how things work, the history of the domain, and what's feasible. But here's the distinction I want you to be very, very clear on. A customer is somebody who pays for the solution or uses the solution. A subject matter expert is somebody who knows about the domain. Both are useful, but always prioritize the person who actually pay. In essence, you should prioritize spending time with customers much more than subject matter experts. While subject matter experts can give you an understanding of the general domain and the history of the domain and the history of the space, because of the time they've spent in the sector, they are often unable to actually reimagine the sector or reimagine the problem. When you spend time with customers, really spend time with them, they can really explain to you the specific problem that they're facing. Here's an example to bring this home. If you asked a corporate communication leader whether there was a need for a new type of corporate communication app, they would say no. They would say we already have several products in this category, such as Cisco WebEx and so on, to have communication. But along the way came Slack. Experts would have dismissed Slack. In fact, a lot of experts dismissed Slack. But Slack was solving a very specific problem for a very specific subset of users. And it became ultimately a $25 billion company. So it's very important to spend time with subject matter experts, but sometimes their deep expertise or their deep time in a category can cause them to miss problems that a customer has and is willing to pay for. The first way we spoke about was finding out and understanding customers' problem. The second way is solving your own problem. Paul Graham of Y Combinator calls this noticing what is broken. This is a medium risk idea because it's riskier than talking to customers because you're assuming that your particular problem is shared by others. Here's how I recommend using this approach. Start with looking at your professional life first. Your job, your field of study, the workflows and challenges and gripes you deal with every day. Why are you focusing on your professional life first? Because as a business user, businesses will pay for efficiency. If you're spending an hour a day doing something frustrating or repetitive, there's probably a decent chance that thousands of professionals in a similar field as you are doing the same thing. And businesses mostly have budgets to solve this type of problem. You can also look at your personal life. However, this is much more challenging because you're looking at problems that you have as a consumer. Unfortunately, consumer-faced problems are often very exciting, but they are very hard to monetize. As consumers are price sensitive, and sometimes their motivations are emotional rather than something that can be quantified and understood. So if you're going to start with sourcing ideas for your own problem, start with your professional life first. Here's an example of what to look for. Notice the spreadsheets you hate updating every week. Notice the copy and pasting that you do between systems that you hate. Notice the one thing that you do manually that could be much better if it was automated, but nobody's actually built a good solution for it yet, or existing solutions don't quite solve the problem. Those are small, concrete, focused, and recurring frustrations that are often indicative of where the real ideas come from. The key here, using this approach, is not just to validate your problem. Once you notice something that is broken in your work, go and talk to 2 or 3 or 4 other people that are similar to you and see if they have that problem. If they have the problem, you might be onto something. Finally, we're going to talk on the approach of sourcing your idea. And I think this is actually one of the riskiest ways of generating ideas. But often, it's also led to some of the largest, most significant, most successful products. This is the Steve Jobs method, where he suggests and says that users don't actually know what they want until they see it. This is called the reimagining of the future method. Why is this high risk? This is because you're not actually solving the core problem. You are trying to create a new behavior. You are taking a significant risk in betting that people will change their behavior. Coming back to Steve Jobs, the iPhone wasn't actually solving a problem that people knew they had. It was creating a brand new category. And funny enough, there had been previous attempts that failed. The Palm Pilot, for example. But when it works, it is obviously transformative. And the upsides are huge. I mean, we don't need to talk about how successful the iPhone was, but the failure rate is so much more higher because you're dependent on market timing, and a bunch of different factors. You're depending on people looking for something that they didn't even know that they needed. I don't want to discourage you from using this method because some of you might have a deep insight and a deep taste into what is coming in the future. And if you do, build it and the impact could be extraordinary. But for most people, especially if you're starting out building AI solutions, I strongly recommend starting out with approach 1, talking to customers, or approach 2, solving your own problem. To summarize, find a concrete problem and narrow it down so that it's really clear. Number 2, solve something for a specific business customer. Number 3, solve something that's broken. Solve something that is not working in your personal or professional workflow and validate it with the filter we built. And then go and build. And then validate it. This path has a much more higher chance of success. And once you build something that people genuinely want, you can then focus on expanding from here. So to recap, now you have the complete framework of the importance of starting with problem first, the importance of defining the criteria to identify and solve the right type of problems, the approach to finding the problems. By doing this, if you get to this stage and you've actually gone through the sourcing of a problem, the filtering of a problem using this criteria, you have dramatically increased your odds of success. In fact, this section on problems is the most important section in the whole study. The reason why a lot of people fail is not about the solution. It's actually about finding a problem worth solving. Thank you.